Can anyone tell me what the second highest grossing animated film of 2015 was? It grossed over $857 million last year. It was the fourth highest grossing Pixar movie of all time. Does anybody know what movie that was? Any guesses?
Inside Out.
Frozen is a good guess. It wasn't Frozen. Anyone who said? I know Inside Out. Yes, Inside Out. That's very good. I heard a few people saying out there. Inside Out. That's right. The movie Inside Out, and it featured comedian Amy Poehler as the voice of Joy. The plot of the movie centers around a young girl named Riley. A young girl named Riley Anderson. She was growing up in Minnesota. The main characters of the movie are personifications of Riley's emotions. Sadness, fear, anger, disgust, and of course, joy. These emotions emerge and they function in a factory-like control room of the movie that is supposed to be situated in Riley's head. The implication of that movie is that we all have these personifications of emotional states of being working within us, working the controls, and whichever personality is dominant controls our behavior. As the movie gets underway, Joy is in control. Joy is the dominant personality type controlling Riley's emotional activity. Now, at the age of 11, things change. Riley's family moves to San Francisco because of her father's new job, and Riley is dismayed. She can no longer play ice hockey, a favorite sport of Minnesota folks, because she is now in San Francisco, and they don't do that there. Maybe they do a little bit, but she has a few bad encounters her first day in San Francisco, and her new school is troubling. On her first day of school, the personification of sadness takes control of the console, and Riley has an emotional breakdown. She starts crying in front of her whole class. This leads to a sad encounter and in the mental headquarters between Joy and Sadness. Joy tries to erase that permanent memory of sadness that happened that day with even more disastrous results. Joy and Sadness wind up on a journey that takes them far away from Riley's emotional headquarters, leaving the other three emotions in charge: fear, disgust, and anger. This is, coincidentally, while Riley is becoming a teenager. With these three emotions battling for control that Joy once held, Riley turns into a despondent, anguished, and apathetic young lady. As the movie starts to wrap up, Joy and Sadness return to Riley's mental headquarters, where anger has completely destroyed the console, leaving everything in a state of chaos. They construct a new control console, but this time, instead of having one control panel, it has 5. And all 5 emotions share equally in the task of guiding Riley's emotional well-being. This makes Riley a much more well-rounded individual and allows her to experience a much more complex emotional life. In this movie, Riley was not able to fully live a fully developed life with Joy controlling all of her emotions. And she certainly was not able to do so when anger took over the controls. Sadness, fear, disgust. But when all of her emotions were able to process and reply in concert with one another, her life became much more fulfilling and complex in a good way. What's more, in this newfound state, she is able to then experience true joy. Not just a surface joy, a bliss that is devoid of all other emotions, but the true joy that comes while all of the emotions, ones that some might call negative, are present as well. The diverse dynamic of the complementary states of being creates a true understanding of joy, a joy that comes not in a vacuum, but the ability to be joyful amidst the complexities and uncertainties of life. So who's running the control room in our mental headquarters? Certainly, I've encountered many who are controlled by anger. They're mad at everyone and nothing can make them happy. Others are controlled by fear. They're always suspicious of people, blaming others for fear of blame being placed on them. Sadness rules the day in many mental control rooms. People who mourn without ceasing, Fixated on people they have lost are the way things ought to be, or the way things used to be, even though they really never were. Disgust is an emotion that is a bit harder to identify, but we see that in people who are so fixated in the way they believe life should be that they're disgusted by anyone who lives differently. And what about joy? Have you ever met somebody who is so fixated on being joyful all the time that you kind of doubt their sincerity? Certainly we all want to be joyful, but the true dynamic of the life we are living is not found in ignorant bliss, but in experiencing the full dynamic of life, the good times and the bad. I think the Riley that is revealed to us at the end of the movie Inside Out, is a much more fully developed person because all of her emotions are working in concert with each other, joy and sadness alike. We were meant to experience a wide array of emotions. Life is rich and diverse. When we allow one emotion to dominate, life suddenly becomes very one-dimensional, not what God intended for us. One of the basic themes of the movie Inside Out is about the search for joy and trying to find joy in Riley's core memories. The characters look at various memories that Riley has gone through in life, trying to find the right memory to restore joy to prominence. Much of the movie was spent searching for joy, which brings us to the question, where do we find joy? In our world today, it is often hard to find joy. We just went through a terrible year of campaigning and elections where people find joy in victory over their opponents. We hear about wars and incursions and military actions all over the world, and there's little joy to be found there. We hear about refugees, God's children displaced and hurting, just like Mary and Joseph were when they traveled to Bethlehem. In this tired and hurting world, where do we find joy? Well, as you figured out by now, joy is our Advent focus this morning. And as we light our Advent candle of joy, we realize that joy is once again one of Christ's gifts to us this Advent season. Jesus brings us the gift of joy. Jesus is not only the light of the world, but the possibility for joy in our world as well. Jesus comes offering joy, but often we find it difficult to embrace that gift. We either allow conflicting emotions to color our acceptance of the gift, or we reject the gift altogether because we don't recognize the joy that Christ offers when compared to worldly understandings of joy. We cannot accept Christ's gift of joy because often we don't understand what joy really is. We don't know where to find joy. Our gospel lesson talks about finding joy. And Jesus tells us that often we find joy in the midst of cultural conflict. Now, Jesus doesn't come out and say joy in that lesson, but we find our joy not in a blissful ignorance of the conflicts that society imposes upon us, but we find our joy in the midst of those conflicts. True joy, as I said, is not found in a vacuum. True joy is found in the dynamic of contradiction. Jesus doesn't shield us from challenges in life, the negativity, the violence, the anger, the sadness, the apathy of the world. Jesus challenged us to affirm our joy in opposition to the challenges, the negativity, the violence, the anger, the sadness, and the apathy of the world. When we can look at the priorities of our culture in the eye and say no, then we will find true joy. So Jesus talks about joy in our gospel lesson. As I mentioned, he doesn't use the word joy, at least not as how we understand it. But nevertheless, this is what he's talking about. We've been focusing on John the Baptist, John the Baptizer, these past 3 Sundays, and his understanding of the coming Messiah. Today we continue focusing on John. John was baptizing people in the River Jordan, a protest against the Roman government, telling people that the Messiah was coming, infecting the people of Israel with joy, even in the midst of the challenges of Roman occupation. But today, now, John is in prison. He was imprisoned by Herod for speaking out against Herod's excesses, and soon will be executed. John sends word from prison looking for joy in the midst of his turmoil. He heard of Jesus, and the message Jesus brought to the people of Israel, and he is holding out hope that this Jesus is the one that he has been anticipating. In the message, he asks of Jesus, "Are you the Messiah? Are you the one we have been waiting for?" Well, you know Jesus, he doesn't answer a question yes or no, does he? He points out the joy that has been brought into the world through his ministry, that has been brought specifically to the oppressed. He tells John through the disciples, he tells John, the blind receive their sight, the lame walk, the lepers are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the poor have good news brought to them. Jesus talks about bringing joy to the world. And for those who have been searching for joy, that joy is found in the life and ministry of Jesus. Jesus reveals his nature to John not with a simple yes or no, but by helping John find true joy. But Jesus isn't done there. He goes on to tell his disciples that the joy he brings is a gift in the midst of a battlefield, a rose growing amongst thorns, if you will. The gift of joy is not found in blissful ignorance, but sometimes it's found by standing in opposition to the world, to culture. Referring to John, he tells them, "Who do you go to see? Someone in soft robes living in a royal palace?" Of course, they didn't go to do any such thing. They went to see a man in shabby clothes, eating locusts and wild honey, and preaching a message of repentance. Jesus tells them that this is where they will find true joy, by being a radical like John, a radical like him. This is where you find true joy, by standing up against the powers that be of the world, the fear, the anger, the distrust, the apathy that our culture inflicts upon us, by standing up for God. For many years, the phrase WWJD was popular, emblazoned across t-shirts and worn on bracelets and necklaces. Of course, those letters stand for the question, what would Jesus do? Often, these four letters are missing a few. More appropriately, many who wore such insignia should have worn the letters WWJD-IICM, meaning, what would Jesus do if it's convenient for me? We embrace Jesus' message as long as we don't have to change our lives. We will listen to Jesus' wisdom as long as we don't have to shift our priorities. We will believe in Jesus as long as it's not too stressful. But that's not what Jesus is telling us today. The joy Jesus offers is a joy that is found not just in the manger, but also on the cross. The joy Jesus offers this Advent season is not just the beauty of a baby, but the true joy that is real even in the midst of crucifixion. True joy means standing up for Jesus' values, principles, mission, and ministry in the world, even when our culture wants to behead us for it, or crucify us. True joy is not when we stick our head in the sand and pretend that everything is okay. True joy is found when the world is flinging hatred and apathy at us, and we can still joyfully stand up for Christ. Now, this sounds like movie Sunday, but I just want to mention the movie Talladega Nights, because I've always disliked the theology of Ricky Bobby. In that movie, he emphasizes his faith in baby Jesus, in the Christmas Jesus, in the Jesus of the manger, and he expresses his discomfort about the Jesus on the cross, the Jesus who challenges us, the Jesus who makes us confront the issues of the world and stand up for Christ. He wants to pray to baby Jesus, not crucified Jesus. The reality of that movie, though, is that it points out the hypocrisy of our culture. How many people are Christmas Christians but not Easter Christians? How many people embrace the baby Jesus but turn a blind eye to the Jesus that is crucified? The reality is that the Jesus of Christianity is not just this infant in a manger. It is the Jesus who is the protester, the countercultural, the rabbi, the radical, the rabble-rouser, the betrayed, the convicted, the crucified, the resurrected, and the ascended. That is where we find true joy, in that dynamic. The manger, that's only the beginning. The manger is the opening scene in the movie Inside Out. Joyful, blissful ignorance. But true joy comes when we know the rest of the story. The cross, the resurrection, and the true life. The fact is, true joy is found in a fully developed dynamic of faith. The more we walk with Jesus, the closer we come to Jesus, the more Jesus is part of our everyday decision-making, the more we will find true joy. The more we turn WWJD-IICM into just WWJD, or even what would Jesus want me to do, the closer we come to experiencing true joy in our lives. True joy is Jesus' gift to us today, but it's not the gift the world gives. Follow Jesus and experience the true joy he offers, even in the midst of conflict. Amen.